event at Energy Lab, and I don't think anyone from Energy Lab's here, but thank you to them for allowing us to use their space. So we are the Smart Energy Council Sydney chapter, so we work in collaboration with the national body, but are looking to bring people together to share ideas, share best practice, and bring industry professionals together to network. I think a lot of you will have been to events before over in UTS, and as I said, this is our first event here in Energy Lab, and I think it's a nice atmosphere, nice and relaxed, so we'll probably host events here in the future. I'm Nick, I'm on the organising committee along with Vaz, who's cameraman this evening, and Steve, who's sat over there in the chair. So if you have any thoughts about how future speakers, any comments about how this evening's worked, we're very welcome to open to feedback, and Steve and I are quite new to the body. Vaz has been on it recently, so we're open to new ideas and how we move forward.
Don't forget Yu Ching.
And Yu Ching, sorry Yu Ching, who's our student representative on the council and helps us with our future direction activities. So as I said, our objective is around bringing industry together, but we've also got a commitment to profile the future leaders of the industry, which is where Yu Ching comes in, who's a student at UTS and helps us to bring in future direction speakers. UNSW, apologies. Don't know who wrote this. From UNSW, of course, and helps us to bring the future leaders from the industry who can be from any university. We're not restricted. So we host monthly events, which some of you have been to before. This may be your first time, where we bring along industry leaders. And tonight we're delighted to have Caroline Pidcock from who's director of Sydney-based Pidcock practice, and is also a founding director of, is it
Living Future Institute Australia.
Living Future Institute Australia, and was recently appointed to 1 Million Women. So as a board member with a lot of experience and a lot of insight to add to the group tonight. A few words from the Smart Energy Council Sydney before we start, and I think one of the smart energy is obviously a key issue going on in Australia at the moment, and I think we ask ourselves why it's important, why we all gathered here today, and why is it important that we continue our work and that we advocate and drive forward this smart energy agenda. Australia is increasingly connected to global energy markets that are rapidly transforming. You see China embracing battery storage and solar and electric vehicles, the EU similarly, and you're seeing countries around the world, for example, committing to electric vehicles in the next 10 years or so. I shared an insight recently that was very interesting in terms of the risk of Australia being left behind when it has the potential and the technology and the individuals to be a world leader in smart energy. And that was that some of you may have seen London taxis driving around Sydney at the moment. And you may be able to tell them from the UK how they ended up here. It's in fact because Australia is so far behind in terms of embracing electric vehicles and its emission standards are far lower than the rest of the world, that London taxi companies, while their emission standards have gone up to Euro 6 and are quite high, over here they don't exist. So taxi firms are exporting these polluting cars into the Australian market because the emission standards are so low. I think it's an interesting example of the risk of Australia being left behind, and not only being left behind but becoming almost a dumping ground for old, obsolete technologies, while other countries are driving forward this smart energy agenda and driving forward that market. So I think it's important that we have these forums and bring people together who are interested in the space, learn from each other and network, and hopefully we can move forward the smart energy agenda. And without further ado, I'll pass over to Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I think, I don't know, I think there's not a better time to be with people who preaching to the church or whatever, preaching to the gospel, because I think we all need to be inspired by each other and reminded that there's a lot of great things happening, and we don't need to be worrying about what's happening at the higher levels, because actually it's the groundswell that's going to make this change, and we together are going to just kind of make the changes that need to happen. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land we meet, because I think that they have had a much better understanding of the land on which we live and how we need to understand it and connect with it and care for it. Because until we do understand and connect with it, we can't care for it. And I think that's part of our disconnection that we need to re-establish. So the Living Building Challenge, I think I have been involved since 1992. I started my own practice and decided that sustainability or green architecture was the agenda, and I have since then pursued finding out what is that about, and I have gone through various stages, and I have learnt a lot on the way. And some of my earlier houses I would be very embarrassed about at the moment. I mean, not from their, passive solar design, great, lights terrible, energy systems terrible, etc. And I think that we are all learning, and I think that that is one of the things that we can say we've got to do is we've got to learn. We've got to say, today I know something more, and what I did yesterday was not great, and we've all got to be able to say that. Living Building Challenge I ran into in about 2012. I went to a conference in Portland, and it was about women and sustainability. And I say a big hello to the very few. I think there's about 3 or 4, 5 women in the room apart from me. I think there's a really big room for a much more diverse group of people making decisions, and I think in that diverse room, different decisions will be made. Anyway, I went to this conference in Seattle about women and sustainability, and it was run by the International Living Future Institute, and I went, oh my God, this is the way of the future. And they are the people behind Living Building Challenge, which they brand as a visionary path to a regenerative future. It's about every act of development being positive, not less bad, but actually good. And that's the sort of, I suppose, let's fly to the moon moment that we involved in this industry need. It's not about incremental change, because incremental change, you see too many roadblocks. When you kind of go, we're going there, you go, holy crap, how do we do that? And then you change your mindset, because you go, my God, if we're going to do that, how do we do that? If you actually convince yourself we are going to do that, the stuff in your brain changes, and you don't stop seeing roadblocks. You say, gosh, well, what is it going to take to get there? So the Living Building Challenge takes on the metaphor of a flower. And a flower it's rooted in where it is. It finds all its own nutrients, energy, water. It creates no pollution, and it's beautiful in the process. And what better metaphor could we have for our buildings? Because that's kind of what we should be aiming for, not being a burden on the system. And why is it a challenge? Well, I don't think I need to tell any of you why this is a challenge, but it is a challenge. And the whole part of this is not that you go through, is that at every step of the way it's not just a challenge for you, but you challenge the industry. And the whole idea is to get through this process, you challenge the industry and try and make change. Because we can't be passive people on this journey. We've got to be change agents. We've got to be saying, that's not good enough, how do we do better? You're not doing the best. So how can we help you, and how can we make this better? Which is exactly what this Living Building Challenge is about. So there are 3 typologies. There's renovation, landscape and infrastructure and buildings. And there, along with the flower metaphor, there are 7 petals. So the idea there's 7 different things, which then have, place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity and beauty. And under that there are 20 imperatives, which I think I'll come back to that. And obviously every different place we live needs to be thought about slightly differently. So if you are able to build in a natural habitat preserve, what you would do and what you should be able to do is quite different to, say, an urban core, and vice versa, and the aims and ambitions. So this has been sort of assisted by the work of a number of urban designers who have come up with these ideas. So it's a very well-informed stratification. There's also this idea of scale jumping, because in an ideal world, you know, the idea of, say, doing a totally autonomous house might be all right in certain places, but in other places that's not actually a very good economy of scale for various things. So to be able to, say, share a sewage system with a slightly larger group, or share a solar system with a bigger one, or a water system. I mean, there's various ideas where scale jumping is actually a much more sustainable or beneficial outcome than just being totally autonomous, but not always. So this is a summary of the 7 petals on the left side, the different buildings, renovations, landscape and infrastructure, and then the 20 20 imperatives, and then where scale jumping can be applied and which ones aren't appropriate. So if you want to get into the detail, you can get online and get all this from the thing. Originally, when they started this, they said they were pretty hard line. They went, you're either going to get full certification or you're going to get nothing. And full certification isn't about gaming the points you get from different areas. You've actually got to completely satisfy, you've got to completely succeed in every petal. So you can't fail in energy and do really well in water and then still get a certification. Anyway, I think they realised that the ask that they've been asking is really huge. So they've said, well, maybe we can have petal certification, which is 3 petals or more, one of which must be one of the 3 toughest ones, which is water, energy or materials. And at the very least, you've also got to satisfy limits for growth and inspiration and education, which I'll come to. And then they've also got this net zero energy, because when they started off, they said, you've got to achieve net zero energy. That means any building you build needs to make as much energy as it uses. So if you can't do that, it's not certified. And now they've said actually you need to do 105%. So I'll come back to that. But so now they've got saying, well, there's some buildings that also should be they've just achieved that, but they've still got to satisfy limits for growth. They've got to do net positive energy. They've got to do beauty and spirit and inspiration and education. So there's something more than just being mechanically orientated. It's a whole lot of stuff. And if you think, is this possible and how much? This is done in 2015, and you can kind of see, so the green is organisational interest, the orange is work that is happening, or a number of living, building, challenge projects. They've also got declared projects, and this is kind of mapping the interest across the world. And I think I am very happy to say that at the moment there are a couple of projects that will be happening in Australia that are some of the biggest LBC projects in the world. One of them is public and 1 or 2 of them aren't, and that will kind of transform the thing. And I'm so pleased that there are people in Australia who are kind of going, you know, this is the way forward and this is what we need to do, because it's hard and it's challenging, and let's do it. So, and basically it is a philosophy based on results. You do not get a certification until you have demonstrated after a year of operation that all of the incentives and the imperatives and the petals have been matched. So it's not modelled. So let's go through each of the petals. So the first one is place, which has this thing called limits to growth, urban agriculture, habitat exchange, human-powered living. Because also, one of the things about Living Building Challenges is it extends the idea of what is a sustainable building past that idea of it's energy efficient, it's water efficient, and it extends it into a much broader kind of understanding. So the first one is limits to growth, which says that we shouldn't be building on land. I mean, the human beings of this world have already taken over too much land. There's not enough land for other species, and we've destroyed a whole lot of the land we've taken over. So really at the moment we should only be building on land that has had impact, that has already been impacted on and is not in delicate areas, and that we should be in our developments improving that land. And I know this is a hard thing. So Narara village, I'm not sure how this would figure, and I'm about to start a project up in Taree. I've been working on a project for 9 years up in Taree that we've just got funding for, and it's First Steps Count Family and Child and Community Centre, and it's on a part of town that was it was stripped back. It was going to be residential accommodation, but it never got developed, and I very early on thought I'm not going to be able to get this registered unless I confirm whether this is a project we can build. And it's a really interesting project because I know a lot of it did get ticked off years ago, but because it had been developed and it's in a place. But it's a really interesting process of saying, well, should we be going onto greenfield sites and building? I mean, should we be taking that up? And I think it's a very different question. You know, it's a very different question all over the world, but here's a line in the sand that says, no, we shouldn't. Interesting to discuss. And you know, not within a floodplain, not within prime farmland, not within old growth forest, primary dunes, etc. And also the landscaping that you know, there's an interesting balance between native landscaping and food landscaping, which we'll come to. Next one, urban agriculture. So again, it says, you know, here we are, a big group of people, we all need to eat. Our projects need to contribute to that. And here's sort of some percentages on how much we need to provide for that. And challenging, but really interesting, and I think we should be looking at this. Habitat exchange. This one says, well, if you're going to develop a hectare of land anywhere, that you should set aside somewhere else a hectare of land in perpetuity that will be protected for other species, because it's not just about us. And finally, the fourth one in this petal is human-powered living, which is about saying, you know, we have gone crazy lately. I mean, we have created, our current environments are all about cars. How do we create places where it's all about people and it's all about connections, and the best place to connect is not with cars? Not to say cars aren't important, but do we need to get into our car to go and buy milk or get a cup of coffee? How do we create communities where the majority of your movements don't require getting into a car, but you know, you can walk, or you can go on a bicycle, or you can get public transport, but not get in a car. And it's not to say car is the enemy, it's just saying stop preferencing that and let's try and work out how we create, because the best places that we live in are not dominated by cars. The next petal is water, and basically it has one imperative, which is net positive water. And the net positive situation for both water and energy came about because after, I think it was Hurricane Katrina hit New York, and all of these houses were unlivable. No one could live in them for weeks, months after, because the water systems, the electricity systems had been destroyed. And the team here thought, you know, a really sustainable house would be able to survive through these increasing weather events and be able to provide basic levels of electricity and water to be able to exist, not necessarily thrive, but exist for a couple of weeks after one of those events until the bigger systems are put back on. And so therefore, the idea for net positive water is that we need to have both water and storage, so that should an adverse event happen, that our buildings could continue to work until things came on board. And the whole idea here is to think about the whole water system as not just water in, water out, but what is the water system and what is the the water ecosystem that we're in, and how do we capture water and treat it with not with chemicals but with other systems, and release enough in and keep enough and use enough without sort of like being a contributor to the system rather than a detractor from the system. This is one example, which is the Omega Centre, and it's in Rhinebeck, and this was sort of put in place to deal with the sewerage of a larger campus, and it has been so successful. They do yoga classes in here, like this is the sewage treatment plant. You know, like I think we've got to revision what is sewage treatment, because it doesn't have to be a horrible, awful place. It can actually be a glorious, gorgeous thing. Now, energy, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room is up on the energy thing. So this is net positive energy. So it suggests that every building should produce 105% of the energy that it uses. There is a little possibility of scale jumping, but I'm going to show you an example of... sorry, the other tricky thing is no on-site combustion. That means no gas, and it means no wood burning. And this is kind of has been a particularly challenging thing for me. And I just went to the most wonderful place. If any of you go to New Zealand, there's a colleague of mine. She and I have been working over there. She's been working her guts out, doing great things. And she has been, and I went over to help her with a few biophilic design workshops. But she's been working on a place called Camp Glenorchy, and that is down near Queenstown. And it's a place where, you know, when you go walking and you go hiking and you want to have a fire afterwards, it kind of didn't fit in with this, but they were aiming for Living Building Challenge. So they worked around it and they had an outdoor fire, and I think they've got through on that one. But it is a challenge, and that's the whole idea of this. But back to this. So the case study here is this Bullitt Centre, which was an office building, a 6-storey office building in Seattle, Washington. I don't know if any of you know Seattle, Washington, but Seattle, Washington is in a it's in a very rainy place. You know, they have more rain than I think anywhere else. So, but they decided that they were going to, they wanted to achieve Living Building Challenge, and part of it was energy. So they said, okay, let's look at the site, let's look at so in the first thing they went, what is the energy use of a typical building in Seattle? And this is the site, and this was the size of the array they would need to provide that energy. And they went, well, that's not going to happen. So then they said, well, let's look at a much reduced energy need, and that's built to code and still way, way, way too big. So then they said, well, let's look at LEED Platinum with all energy points, let's go for that. And it's still too big. So you're kind of going, well, if you're going for this challenge, maybe too big a building for the site, or what do you do? So then they went down to this, which was bigger than they had, but it kind of it stuck out over the building, over the sidewalks at a high level, and it was an incredibly ambitious energy target. But they went to the council and said, can we do this? And the council understood what they were trying to achieve and went, yes, okay, so you can overhang our footpaths 6 stories up, and that's okay. And then they said, okay, that's our energy target, and that's what we've got to design the building to achieve. It's not what do we want to, how much energy do we want to use, and then how do we supply it? It's, okay, what's the target and how do we achieve the building? And I think there were some really interesting outcomes from that. This is another one in Washington, in Issaquah, which is just outside Seattle, and this was it's called Z Homes, as they say in America. And this was a development of about, I think, 11 or 12 townhouses, and it got interrupted by the whole financial crisis. But and someone came on, Brad, who ended up working for the Living Future Institute, and he just was going, let's do this. But this place is net zero energy. So with a group of 11 houses, and they collectively gather their energy, and I think they've got geothermal as well to support for the heating, but they are net zero energy in this group of 10 houses, which is 10 or 11 townhouses. And it's a beautiful arrangement, it's really well done. So health and happiness, on to the next petal. This one is about a civilised environment, which sounds fantastic, healthy interior environment, also fantastic, and a biophilic environment. So a civilised environment has this idea, this crazy idea, that every habitable room should have an openable window. And you sort of go, well, duh, but if you go to most office buildings in Sydney at the moment, none of them do. And like even just opening this up and just getting that fresh air in is such a... I mean, there are days when you don't want it, but generally speaking, for probably about 9 months of the year, having a bit of fresh air coming in and that irregular airflow is a beautiful thing. Next one is a healthy interior environment, which is about making sure that the quality of the air quality is really good, and that we manage that through a number of different things. No VOCs. I mean, think about, which is something that I haven't heard about in Australia, but you know, making sure when you come into a building you don't carry dirt in on your shoes. So you've got to have certain amounts of things to take that dirt off your feet. No smoking in the project, and a whole lot of other things, which is, it's a really hard one to say, no, we shouldn't be doing that. No, of course we should. So this is what the IAQ testing goes for, which is all things you don't want in your building. And then a biophilic environment. I think this is one of the ones that I'm most inspired by at the moment and am getting very involved with. Biophilia is, bio is life, philia is love. So it's about a love of life, and it's about creating buildings or environments where there is a meaningful connection, where you enable meaningful connections between people and the natural environment, meaningful and multi-sensory connections. And it has been shown to deliver so many benefits on so many levels that it's, if you go into hospitals, people with views are less, get well sooner, have less drugs, they cost less. If you have schools, people learn better, they do better in their tests. If you have offices, it's the simplest thing in the world to do. Plus also, it's the most meaningful thing, because so many people, I bet every person in this room, if you think about a meaningful connection to nature, it might be, say, going to the ocean where you can smell it, you can taste it, you can feel it, you can hear it, you can see it. It's those sorts of, or in the bush or somewhere, and you feel immediately, you can breathe in deeply and feel great about it. And people go, oh, but we can't do that in cities. It's like, no, we have to do that more in the cities, because we have to do it everywhere. So this is, there's a guy called Steve Kellett who helped develop it after another guy who sort of really got it started. And there's a whole bunch of different ideas, and it is one of the most rich and interesting and rewarding ways of thinking about what we need to be doing for our built environments. And I'm been doing a few biophilic, as I said, my colleague in New Zealand who did the Camp Glenorchy, she's doing, taking the Otago Polytechnic through the Living Building Challenge, and I went over to help her do a couple of biophilic design workshops there, and we'll be doing it up at Taree, and I'm helping doing it at Sydney Uni. But it's just, and I've never found, it's amazing how engaged people are in this, because it's a really easy thing to be engaged. Onto materials. This is one of the hardest of the petals. Shouldn't be, but it is. So the first one is red list. And the red list says, you know what? All of these things are poisonous and toxic, and we shouldn't have them in our buildings. And we shouldn't have them in the materials we put in our buildings. And you go, well, sure, but you try and find building materials that don't have them, and it is really, really, really insane. It is insane that we allow this much toxicity into our building materials, but we do. So the idea is to work out building materials that don't have these. And if you can't find them, and there are many things that you can't find, then the idea is you don't go, oh, we can't find them. You go, we can't find them, and so we are writing letters to the suppliers of these materials to tell them how crap this is and that they should change. So, the International Living Institute has developed this thing called Declare, and Declare has, the interesting thing about Declare is it's got 3 different things. It's got LBC Red List Free, which means there are none of those chemicals and toxic things. LBC Compliant, which means it's got 1 or 2 of them, it's either too small or there's no alternatives. Or it's declared, and it's gone, yeah, we've got shit in our stuff, we're declaring because we're engaged in this process, and we have got ambitions to change that and reduce it. And again, getting back to, this is a challenge. It's not about leaving status quo as it is. It's about every part of this trying to help move the industry on. So the Living Future Institute Australia is currently trying to get a number of projects declared. And the biggest project that we are allowed to talk about that's happening in Australia is the Brickworks shopping centre at Burwood, just outside Melbourne in Victoria. It's a $62 million project. It is a shopping centre, and they are aiming to achieve full living building challenge. They're going for net zero, net positive energy, net positive water, growing food on the roof, no red list chemicals. They are going for the full caboodle. And because they, which is a huge project, need a huge number of declare products, because you need at least 1 per 500 square metres of a project, there's a number of product manufacturers in Australia who are getting declared as we speak, which is fantastic. This is a case study. So back to the Bullet Centre with the roof. They had a wet flash. I mean, the Americans have some strange. So it's a waterproofing layer, and they went to this and they said, well, we can't use this because you've got phthalates in your thing. And they went, oh, right. I wonder if we need them. And then they went and researched, and they went, no, we can actually find an alternative, and we don't need to put this shit in our things. And they changed their whole product. And they are now, it was used on that project, and it's now being used in living building challenge projects all over America. But it changed that company because they weren't even aware that what they were putting into their thing was awful. Embodied carbon footprint is about, you actually have to account for your entire carbon footprint of your project. And that's through, from construction through the whole of life, which is a very challenging thing. So then that makes you think about, well, how much carbon are you putting into every material? What happens when we renovate? What happens in the future? Etc. And gosh, shouldn't we think about that? Responsible industry is back to declare, but also just, we shouldn't, I mean, timber is a fantastic product if it comes from a forest that has been sustainably harvested. If it comes from a forest that hasn't been sustainably harvested, is it a great thing? I'm not sure. No, the answer is no. And other products. So we've got to get third-party certification on this, because people tend to upskill their own products, and you've got to get third-party. This is one of my most favourites. This is living economy sourcing. And basically this one says, if you're going to have a sustainable building, it needs to invest in the local economy, the local culture, and the local materials. So that if you start really designing with that, your building will reflect that local economy, that local skills set, and the local materials. But also it will invest in that place and be important in helping that place thrive and be alive. The idea of sort of shipping in things and people from elsewhere that has got nothing to do with the place actually isn't super sustainable if you think it from a whole lot of places. So there's a whole lot of ideas to say, well, there should be some locally, and really there's a whole lot of stuff that you won't be able to get locally, but you know, think about it at a very deep level, and then and rethink think at the very beginning when you start the project, what are the local skills and materials, and let's shape that project by thinking about that. And net positive waste, you know, gosh, has anyone been on a building site and seen how much waste there is? Let alone been on a redevelopment, you know, like a renovation, and seen how much waste. And we have got, I mean, waste is a word we need to remove from our lexicon. It needs to be a resource. So we need to think right from the beginning about how we construct these buildings and how to not deliver waste in their construction, in their renovation, and in their end of life. And that is complex and difficult and challenging, but necessary. Next one is equity. A sustainable building is equity. So the first one is human scale and human places. And there's, you know, like, we've got to think about how much parking areas we have. We've got to try and because too much, like that is not sustainable, that's not great. We've got to think about people-orientated streets and different block sizes. I think we need to expand our thinking about all of these things. We also need to think how many signs we have, because they can be really alienating. Facade openings, because when it's a complete no openings, it's a completely unfriendly streetscape. Maximum building footprints and frontages, and then just human scale features. I mean, we should be designing beautiful, enjoyable places. And then there's universal access to nature and place. If you design a building and you get lots of sun, and you get lots of breezes, and you get great access to all of these things and your neighbours don't, not sustainable. You know, we kind of need to think about fresh air, sunlight and natural waterways, and ensure that when we're making our buildings good on this level, that our neighbours and our surroundings can also achieve the same. This one's an interesting one, equitable investment. This it says that for every dollar of the total project, you need to set aside a cent or more to a charity. So that people who are doing projects are often in a much better position to be able to do this, and so to give a very small percentage to someone who isn't is a good idea. Say up in Tyree, where our client is a charity, I think in that instance we'll probably be able to negotiate that 1% might be able to go into supplying PV panels to the charity, which is the client. So it's not sort of stupid, but it is just saying, well, you know, big rich clients probably could afford to give 1%, or, you know, what is it? It's even less than 1%. It's like 0.00% to others. And just organisations is another one. So this says, well, all the companies working in this should be doing their bit. They should be running themselves in a just way. And so it suggests that at least one of the larger companies involved needs to have a just certification, and just says, are you looking after your employees correctly? What sort of things have you got in place that look after them? What do you do with your investments? Where do you source your materials? And a whole lot of things. I mean, so there's diversity, equity, safety, worker benefit, local benefit, stewardship. It is interesting to see that some of those things in Australia are you know, you have to, you know, we have to provide health. Well, there is universal health care. There is a base wage, which in America there isn't. So clearly there's a bigger gap there. One of the key things, say, in the project we're working on is you need 5 people or more to get a just certification, and there's a number of smaller practices that don't. So we've got to work. I need to talk to the Institute about that. And then finally, the other one is beauty. And gosh, isn't that a wonderful thing to have as a petal? So this sort of suggests that if something is beautiful, you'll care for and look after it and make it last longer. And making buildings last a long time is one of the most important things you can do from a sustainability point of view. If you look at this building here, I don't know, how old is it? It must be over 100 years old. And all of the timber that was used and the bricks were used are still being used. And that is sustainable in a big way. So beauty in spirit is, the first one is we must contain design features solely intended for delight, for human delight, to make people using this building or participating in this building just feel delight. And I don't think you can know. And the last one is inspiration and education. And this is saying, you're going to learn a lot in this process and you've got to share it. Because if you share it, the good and the bad, then the next people who come along will find it much easier to do even more. And the idea is not that you are competing to be the best. The idea is that you put in all you can and then you share it so that the next people will do even better and you'll have contributed to that success. And so there's a whole lot of stuff about how to share that and I think that there's never been a bigger time for people to share information, because I think we all need to be inspired and we all need to get information more easily. So these are a few schools. The one on the left is, and I have actually been to that, is the Birchie School in Seattle, and it is so gorgeous. And they've got a swale in the classroom, which is, it's got a glass top and stone underneath, and when it rains, the rain runs through there, which reminds all the children of the importance of the rivers in their system. And they've got salmon, like copper salmon, sort of put embedded into the concrete slab, because the salmon, which I had not realised, but the salmon that go into those streams, when the bears kind of catch them as they go upstream, they sort of throw their bodies into the forest, and that protein is vital for the forest's survival. So there's a whole ecosystem there that every day these kids in this science lab are reminded of. The preparatory school in Hawaii at the top, this is shaped because there are winds that come over, but also all of this dew. Hawaii is one of the driest places in the world, I think second most only after Antarctica. And so dew that comes off this at night is collected down here and reused. And the whole system, and then all of this concrete is just beautifully laid out. The concreters got so involved in the project, they put more time and sort of invested these lovely stories in the concrete, which tell stories of the place. And it's really beautiful. I haven't been to the Tyson Living Centre. These are living certified. I haven't been to either of those. I think that Omega Centre is that's the sewage treatment centre, which is like the best looking sewage treatment centre you see. This is the Phipps Conservatory at Pittsburgh, which is a beautiful building on the edge of a whole botanic gardens that just cares for the place it's in. The Bullitt Centre is amazing. In that Bullitt Centre, even though they get a lot of rain, because they've got 6 stories and they haven't got a lot of roof space, all the toilets in there are composting because they weren't able to catch enough water to have flushing toilets. And then the composting, they've got a whole system in place that is then treated, and it isn't waste, it becomes an incredibly fabulous resource for farms outside. And Trish, my friend at Clamp Glenorchy, took those composting systems and it's sort of system 2 point whatever, and it's even better over there. That's the Z Homes at Issaquah, NRDC in Chicago, which I haven't been to. It's just showing there's one in New Zealand. In fact, actually one of the best, was just recently, there is a living building, challenge certified building in North Island of New Zealand, built for the Tuhoi tribe, and it is a sensational building. We're still trying to get one here. The University of Wollongong Sustainable Building Research Centre did design their whole building around this, but it hasn't achieved certification yet. But lots of examples, and glorious and gorgeous places, and all over the world. So I just think that the one on the right is a building. I have been to that one as well. That was a renovated bank building, which was terrible. It was a bank building built of concrete panels in the middle of gangland walls, so it was pretty impenetrable. And And these guys kind of bought it and opened it up, and they weren't able to get Living Building Challenge, but they were energy advisors, so they got net zero energy, which was great. Anyway, lots of different, houses, schools, libraries, all sorts of things. And if you do join up and say, I want to do a Living Building Challenge, they've got handbooks in place to help you. A little bit American centrified, but the Living Future Institute Australia is here to help. So anyway, so I just sort of think that at this time, this is the sort of thing we need to be doing to kind of elevate. We need to accelerate our ambition. We need to not be overwhelmed by stuff. We need to kind of raise our eyes high and go, gosh, how do we do that? Rather than saying can't do it, just go, how do we do that? And get around you a whole lot of enthusiastic and keen people and make wonderful places for us to live in. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I think everyone will agree it's a very interesting talk, and I think aligns very much with what we're doing. It's also interesting to hear how smart energy fits into the living